In light of the recent calamities, Women Tech Makers Manila will be holding a donation drive. Funds raised will be given to organizations working on relief operations for families affected by the typhoon. If you wish to donate, you may send it through the bank accounts flashed on your screen. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy this webinar.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Yu, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Rumarocket. I'm very excited to be here today to discuss with you guys the science of behavior, or how we can use data on human behavior and create nudges to help ourselves and companies better understand how to motivate people in the workforce. So, first, a little bit about myself. I'm Kathleen. I started my company as a college student. And for a long time, I've really been passionate about data science and behavior. And I sought to find a way to combine those two because when I was in college, I encountered a challenge. So my friend basically communicated with me at that time that she was having challenges paying her fees, so she had to find a job at a call center, and a lot of the time she was getting rejected. And I thought it was strange because this was somebody who was very smart, very talented, and very capable. And it really got me to try to understand what happens in the recruitment process from the time somebody examines your CV to the time they hire you. I wanted to understand what decisions went into the process, how those decisions work, and if I could do something to improve those parts of the process. And I found a few good questions from the recruitment to the selection process. And all of those questions, actually, I've spent the last 7 years of my time as an entrepreneur really discovering and really uncovering the data to help me understand why we look at CVs, for example, as a good source of decision making information, and how good CVs are at actually helping us find good candidates. The other thing is, in the Philippines, we like to do really long personality assessments. Are those assessments something that actually measures a person's proficiency? Or is it something that is just fun to fill out? Finally, for the interview process, when you look at somebody or you interview them from across the room, how accurate is a recruiter's perceptions around that? And can you measure or evaluate whether a recruiter has a good perception on the talent of a candidate? The second part I looked at actually was, once the talent gets hired, um, does having good assessment scores translate to good performance? Once you have good performers, what are events or trigger events you can look at to help you understand how employees today are engaged? And finally, um, really, how can we go beyond just the carrot and stick motivation model, or looking at it in terms of you do something or you put in your 9 to 5 and I'll give you a reward for it? So, all of these questions I spent a lot of time looking at. And some of them I found very interesting answers to by digging into the data and really trying to understand what trends were there. So, for example, does a good CV translate to a good talent? Looking at the data, I've actually found that it depends on how companies define good. And a lot of the time, when the company has a rubric or a measure for what they think is a good talent, it can be inaccurate because, for example, certain skill sets uh, might not be translatable for certain roles, as an example. The other times, it's really you have to look at what values the company has and whether uh, the CV aligns towards the company's larger values. So it's not necessarily a yes or a no answer. It really depends on whether how the company defines it. Another question I looked at was something interesting I found when examining job satisfaction data. So what I found was employees who gave very high job satisfaction ratings to their bosses and to the company without having additional comments were actually more than 5 times likely to quit within the next few months. And I thought it was an interesting trend, so I spent some time examining it. And I found a lot of the time, most of this disengaged employees were already too apathetic to give criticism. So it's actually a very good indicator if an employee is going to leave when you look at their job satisfaction for the last quarter and whether they answered any of the essay portions. So very interesting finding. And then the last one was really once employees left, were managers able to predict the reasons why? So I looked at exit interview data and I compared managers' predictions with exit interview data. And what I found was managers were only accurate about 2% of the time. And this was consistent regardless of rank, length of tenure at the company, and experience. I found a phenomenon in the workplace where most managers just really don't understand their talent. And this is something that I was really curious about, especially since for me as a millennial, I'm really excited about working for a company or working for something where I'm connected to the purpose. I'm connected to the meaning of why I'm doing what I'm doing. But you have these trends supported by data in the workplace that actually shows that most managers, while able to deliver results, are not necessarily aligned with the needs of the people. And this was the driving force that really led me to understand and to build the products that I built around Rumarocket. Because right now we're starting to see the effects at scale because of the COVID-19 pandemic, where more than 59 million people have gotten it worldwide, and we're almost at a million deaths. Even in the Philippines, we have almost 500,000 cases and 6,000 deaths. And what the pandemic has really brought into stark focus is we have a configuration problem for global workforces, not only in the Philippines. So essentially, we make decisions around the workplace every day, around home, around kids, around leisure time, around work activities. And those configurations basically form the basis of what we call our society. But because of the pandemic, those configurations today are out of whack. We can't go to a movie that can't go to see a movie anymore because we might get sick. Work and home are intermingled in a sense, so it's really hard to divide where work starts and home ends, if you know what I mean. And basically, even me giving this speech right now, in front of my desks at my house, to you guys is really an indication of how much our society's configurations and decision making has changed. And as we move forward throughout the pandemic, it's really become more and more critical to look at how we make those kinds of decisions in the workplace. and what adjustments we need to make to move forward in this new environment. So this leads me to behavioral science. So it's something that I've learned about and been working on and building products around for the last 7 years with my startup. And when you talk behavioral science, it's really looking at the thinking processes that we make as a people and trying to understand where the strengths and weaknesses are. And when we collect data on those behaviors, we call it behavioral analytics. So it's really how can the data on people's behaviors help you make sense of what the new patterns and trends are? And how can you use those patterns and trends to make decisions about future behavior? So, first, let's look at something called cognitive biases. So, most of the time, cognitive biases are something that's unconscious for us. We experience it, but a lot of us are not exactly aware when we have a bias towards something. So, cognitive biases basically are errors in our thinking process when we process information because each person has a unique perspective. And based on each person's unique perspectives, we make decisions differently. So let me tell you about some cognitive biases that I encountered during the recruitment process. So this was a study I did with 15,000 people over the last several years of my work. And what happened really was I was looking at recruitment processes for Philippine companies and trying to understand what made recruiters more excellent compared to other beginner recruiters, what perspectives they brought to the table, and how I could replicate it using machine learning. So basically, how could I get the process that the recruiter goes through with a candidate, translate it to data, and plug it into a machine learning solution. So this led me to creating what I call our behavioral recruitment platform, essentially a tool that uses behavioral analytics and machine learning to predict the performance of new hires in a company. So how did it work? What we did actually was we got the success indicators for high performing talent. And one of the things we discovered was a lot of the time companies were not really cognizant as to what made their high performers high performers. But if you ask, let's say, a group of managers who's a high performer, they could easily point you to the same people. So what we did was we got those pool of individuals and we gave them a lot of assessments, of course, to help them to help understand whether they have unique traits or unique characteristics that make them better than their peers. And one of the interesting things we found, so for example, with a pharmaceutical company that we worked with, they were very keen on English proficiency for their high performing salespeople. But what we found was when we looked at the data, it wasn't English proficiency that actually translated to better sales. It was the number of languages spoken. So salespeople who knew more dialects uh, month on month were actually able to meet their quota at a better rate than salespeople who were listed as having high English proficiency. So with another FMCG company we worked with, um, they tended to hire people only from the top schools. And so UP, Ateneo, LaSalle, DLSU, and they were having a challenge with retaining these talents because most of them would leave once they got to a middle management position. And because of that, the company had challenges filling in their middle management gaps. And once we got into the data, we actually found that what school they were from, whether they had a good GPA, whether they had joined so many clubs or so on were actually less predictive of performance when compared to a factor called grit. So, grit is basically passion and perseverance for long term goals. And it was pioneered by Dr. Angela Duckworth. And what she found was intellectual capability, physical capability. Basically, all of those were secondary to predicting the likelihood that people would persist and eventually succeed in a particular role when compared to their grit. So overall, people with higher grit tended to succeed over a longer period of time. And once we broke it down for that company, what we actually found was they were ignoring a group of high grit talent who just didn't have the right profiles from their CV. And when we discovered that, we actually helped them adjust their recruitment process. In essence, to actually open up their process towards more types of talent. So one of the things I really realized around that process was most of the time companies have some idea of what makes their talent good. But when you go down to the data and the narrative that's being told by the data, you get a completely different story. So what I did next was I sought to plug it into a machine learning process. So I have this idea that if I measure behavior and other characteristics for talent for different companies, I can actually have a sense of who's a high performer and what characteristics make them high performers. So my next step was how do I plug it into a machine learning process? So you can have a piece of software that basically looks at the raw data of existing talent's excellence, learns from that, and selects candidates based on that process. So this is a study we did with the Philippine real estate company. And when we first started working with them, only 3% of their sales force was making sales. So what we did was we got characteristics that were unique to those 3%. We looked at grit, how they dealt with adversity. We found very interesting things like how they answered an essay question in the application process was actually predictive of whether they would go on to make continuous sales. And the question basically was what was the biggest adversity you encountered in your life and how did you solve it? And what we found was high performing sales, so the 3% were actually more likely to respond in a way that phrased diversity as I acted on this event as opposed to this event happened to me. So something like I was able to overcome the separation of my parents or my family bankruptcy by compared to my family went bankrupt and I was miserable. So we classified those salespeople as basically active sufferers. So basically, people who were really, really good at constructive suffering. So we plugged in those values, trained it on an algorithm, and um, they've been using it for their recruitment process for I think almost 3 to 4 years now. So within the first 6 months, it went from 3% of their workforce making sales to 96% of their workforce making sales. Over a 2 year period, they had a 56 times increase in average sales for each client. And for every recruit hired, the every recruit, as you can see, the new sales, sorry, compared to the existing, sorry, let me bring back my presentation. So as you can see, Every new recruit hired from the initial implementation period in 2017 actually led into a 600% increase in total sales for our client. So the machine learning model was able to exponentiate the recruiter's process, take out the biases that we have around, oh, she's from UP or oh, she's from Ateneo, and really look at what factors improve overall performance. And it was able to translate to a very significant bottom line increase for the company in question. So, what I'm really driving at when looking at cognitive biases is we have them as decision makers and as people, especially in the workplace. But there are solutions out there that can actually help us overcome a lot of these biases and really plug into a process where you can improve how you hire or the quality of talent that your company has just by basically looking at the data, the behavioral data, in a very different way. So the second part of my presentation really has to do with once you have the data, how do you act on it? What's the next step? So to get into that, let me introduce you to something called a nudge. So a lot of the time nudges are things that are actually used to facilitate behavior change by actually personalizing how we're motivated. So when you use Facebook or Netflix, for example, you're nudged based on your interactions on the tool to stay longer on the platform or binge watch Queen's Gambit or Startup. So those nudges are actually um, difficult to detect. But once you see them everywhere in a lot of the systems and solutions that we have now, especially for internet based tools. Now, moving forward, I just want to differentiate how we're defining personality and behavior. So, in psychology, there's actually no difference between both terms. Personality is just classified as repeat behavior. But for our research and the work that I've been doing with Rumarocket, what I've found is actually personality test scores don't exactly translate to performance down the road. So I differentiated the definitions for both values. And the way I look at it is behavior is really personality in action. So when you look at, for example, grit scores of new recruits, what we found was the grit scores tended to increase or decrease depending on the context. So you had very high grit scores for people who were about to be recruited, and then once they're 6 months in the company, there's a significant drop. And then the longer they stay at at the company, the more normalized the grit scores become. So in essence, behavior, the behavior or how the people answered the personality tests was very context dependent. So when they were being in the recruitment phase where there was a stake, they tended to um overinflate their self-perception of themselves. So that's why I differentiate between the two. So I just have a few examples of nudges here just to help us understand what a nudge is, how it works, and maybe to help you detect what are the kinds of nudges that you see around you today. So some researchers in the UK actually did a test where they had a group of people and they gave them basically two messages about a bottle of Coca Cola. And the first one was this 125 ml bottle of Coca Cola contains 120 calories. The second one was you would need to walk a half kilometer every day to lose the calories from just one 125 ml bottle of Coca Cola. And what they found was people were actually more reactive, or they tended to react better to the second one. They were less likely to buy Coca Cola, junk food, when the impact of those junk foods or eating those junk food was actually translated to how much exercise they would need to do to lose the weight. So that's just one example of a nudge. Another example is you have a few life insurance policies, and sometimes they try to convince you to get the policy by looking at the numbers or looking at what's in the plan. And what they found over a period of testing with some candidates was looking at it, a life insurance policy, as helping with your peace of mind compared to just dollar cost savings was actually more helpful for getting people to close. So people were more likely to subscribe to the emotional hook compared to the financial or transactional one. Another one is if you're a user of free Spotify like me, every few songs you get the notification, try Spotify Premium right now, and you can skip to your best or your most favorite songs quickly. It only costs you 5 pesos for this month, and then they increase the price later. But you see it a lot when the companies want to you to subscribe for a certain account. They usually direct your eye with very colorful buttons and very eye-catching details, so you make a decision quickly without really thinking about it. So that's another example of a nudge. And as I mentioned with Netflix as well, when they prompt you and when they email you and say, "Oh, we have this new movies or this new recommendations at Netflix," essentially they're nudging you to get you to sort of go back to the platform. Then you have the tools around Facebook, which is basically full of nudges to keep you on Facebook scrolling and stalking your high school friends just to see what they're up to and so on. And essentially, when you look at it, a lot of the nudges today are primarily used as ads, and they're used to influence people to buy to stay longer on the platform or to get people committed to a certain task. If you use email recently, sometimes if you don't reply to your message for a long time, your Gmail inbox has a prompt below where it says, "You received this 3 days ago, you should respond." And I'm sorry. And essentially, it's used by companies um, to reinforce a behavior that they want you to do. And a lot of them are built into organizations as well to empower and motivate people to behave in a certain way. So, in essence, nudges are very powerful tools, and a lot of them they're easy to miss. So, as I mentioned, combined with things like cognitive biases, it's difficult for us to sort of sense when we're being nudged. But once we're conscious of it, we're less receptive to the effects of the nudge. So when you look at what we see around you, there's a lot of personalization. There's a lot of nudging everywhere. Ads essentially taking advantage of our cognitive biases to get us to behave in a certain way. And in essence, we're being nudged on most of the systems and tools that we use. And one of the questions I thought was, how come there's no personalized nudges for the employment process? Or how come we still have an employment process that's a carryover from the industrial age, where roles are one size fits all, where things are very challenging, especially for talent now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's unclear how we can evolve as our skills, our job skills, and so on. And what does it really mean to adapt when the world's gone crazy? And I thought perhaps there's a case here for personalized nudging in the workforce, to prompt people to better reskilling, to use machine learning to improve the learning process, and really to give people the data that they need to work well together. And before I go into it, one of the interesting things I just wanted to share was a story I had with when I attended the St. Gallen Symposium in Switzerland last year. And I had the opportunity to meet and speak to the chairman of DBS, Mr. Piyush Gupta. And one of the challenges he mentioned was that over time, he's having to reskill a bigger and bigger segment of his workforce at the bank because not many people are able to adapt to the changing trends with talent. New people are coming in, the tech's changing, the processes are changing quickly. So, one of the things he said that really struck me was we give them cash on hand and we have them set up their own bakery. And it got me thinking how many of these people end up succeeding, how many of these people end up failing. And really, as our workforce changes, how can we use nudges, which are widely used in ads nowadays, to actually improve the interactions that we have for our workforces today? And what I realized is if you could combine three technological elements, so the behavioral psychology element with the AI prediction element and the personalized recommendation element, you could actually develop a nudging system that could actually be implemented to help companies make their workforces more productive, more engaged, and sort of personalize how employees are rewarded. So moving from an employment model from even before the digital age, where people are treated as cogs in a machine, to a model where if we can have such sophisticated technology to nudge people to buy things, why can't we nudge better employment outcomes? Why can't we nudge better learning outcomes? Why can't we nudge better adaptive behaviors in the workplace? So here's an example, just so you guys get an idea of how it works. So one of the things we found with the data is people whose ages are ending in 9, so 29 years old, 39, 49, they're actually more likely to look for big life challenges. So they have a higher likelihood of resignation. So we plugged the data into our AI models just to see how much the impact was when somebody's 29 years old and looking for a new perspective. And what we found was people with this profile are actually 6 times more likely to resign when compared to the average. So overall, there was a significant impact. And probably if you're a line manager working with a lot of people, you see this impact every day. You have people resign a lot and you're unclear, so you have to spend time, money, effort to recruit them, bring them back in, sort of coordinate and work with them to get things running again. And as I mentioned a while ago, most managers are only 2% accurate when predicting why their employees leave. So what we found was if we could have a system that nudges the manager, hey, Kathleen is 29 years old today. Have you talked about her career development plan today? It actually reduces the resignation likelihood by a lot. So a manager preemptively talking to you about how you can grow in X company or Y company can actually really change the game in terms of whether you're going to jump into another job or give the opportunity you're at a chance. So combining these elements really translates to more of a proactive talent culture where instead of reacting once people resign or once people don't perform, the system and the solutions are really proactively challenging the data that you collect about your people. So managers are able to think, okay, I need to do this with this person, or I need to run this with that person. And you really have a continuous process where you're improving the people interactions that you have every day. And so what I did next was I tried to plug it into a behavioral process. So the behavioral process is basically the personality characteristics I measured, and I wanted to find out whether you could nudge people based on their unique personalities and characteristics. So, for example, would people with high or low grit be nudged differently, or would people with high or low adversity quotient be nudged differently as well? And how could you build a machine learning system? So similar to the one a while ago that reduces cognitive biases, how could you build a machine learning system this time to reduce to sort of nudge and to create a proactive talent culture with the companies that we work with. So we plugged in personality characteristics, and this time it was a group of salespeople again. And one of the challenges the company we worked with had was really how can we keep our salespeople consistently motivated to perform? And so we looked at the personality characteristics of the salespeople, and what we found was we were able to isolate between highly competitive versus highly collaborative people, highly conscientious salespeople versus less detail oriented, highly open to new experiences, so highly innovative salespeople versus more traditional salespeople. And what we did was we developed a set of nudges for them around the trigger event. And the trigger event was basically whenever somebody in the team closed the sale. And one of the very interesting things we found from the study was that highly competitive salespeople were more likely to open and engage with nudges where another team made a sale. So they were more triggered by other team members other teams, people not in their team or people not them making a sale. When they got a notification that they had made a sale or somebody in their team made a sale, they were less likely to open it. And at the same time, highly collaborative salespeople, on the other hand, were more likely to open and engage with nudges where their own team members made the sale, or they were able to facilitate or help somebody make or close a sale. So we found something interesting as we personalized the nudging process for this sales team. As the nudges got more personalized, the effect got more pronounced, basically. They tended to open more of the nudges that they were initially drawing to. But at the same time, in terms of performance, the number of days to their next sale reduced for people who opened nudges that they resonated more with compared with a control group of people who just got a random set of nudges. So over time, as they were nudged across their performance, across improving their behaviors, across motivation, like, oh, here's a cup of coffee, congratulations on closing a sale. So over time, their performance was actually already affected in a positive way as well. And they were also able to improve on the number of days, shorten the number of days it took to close a sale, while keeping themselves engaged. So these people reported higher levels of engagement around their job. So very interesting, right? So from there, I decided, how can I take this further? How can I explore it more and see how we can bring it to different tools or solutions? And what I realized is, off the ground, we collect a lot of data around HR processes. So, employee spreadsheets, wellness data, you have data dashboards. So my thinking was more along the lines of, what if you could turn all of those data points into nudges? So nudges based on trends, based on patterns around employee behavior. And what if you could combine the nudge with a set of solutions? So things that normally appear in articles or consultant sessions, so all of those actions basically that you can do every day with your team members or with your manager to improve your engagement or to improve your productivity. And what I found was, when you combine the two, you could actually build a solution around improving a team's productivity. So this one, we deployed it in the version of an app, and we had the company develop unique nudges, connect their incentive plans around it. So coffee, early out for that day, with gift cards, discount coupons, and so on. We connected that with payroll. We connected it with HRIS, and we sort of deployed it on an app for the companies that we work with. And basically, they're able to use it from a work from home standpoint and really improve how they engage with the information that they get on the workplace every day. Essentially, it's a tool to help you improve how your people data can actually translate to better decisions around your people. And what's exciting about this is, we were not only able to apply it to productivity use cases, we actually successfully run it on a manufacturing company as well. But instead of looking at people data or people inventory information, or instead of looking at people or behavioral data, we were looking at how customer behavior, how a customer orders, the order pattern of the customer, how much inventory they have, how many deliveries. So for this manufacturing company, a big challenge that they had was, a lot of the information that was coming in from client orders was coming in at a very, very quick rate. And because of that quick rate, it was very difficult for the people on the ground to manage the information coming in. So, how do I prioritize which client gets delivered first? How do I make sure that all the trucks or all the vehicles that are dispatched undergo the necessary checks and the necessary processes before they're delivered to the client? So we deployed it around the nudge system, and in essence help the company develop nudges around their manufacturing process, so they could move proactively as opposed to waiting for the order to come in at the assembly line. And when you look at the nudging, eliminating cognitive biases, essentially combining behavioral science and machine learning, what we're really looking at is, how do you make the data that you collect as actionable as possible? And how do you take into consideration the people element around the data? So, collecting data has always been something that's very interesting, especially now. We're talking about data as the new gold, and a lot of companies, a lot of institutions now look at it as a matter of quantity over quality. But A factor that often gets ignored around this process is the people aspect, because when you generate data around people behaviors, what happens is you're looking at information generated as people interact with information. And as I've shown you a while ago, we have cognitive biases that mean that the way we interact with information, the way we make decisions around data won't necessarily always be perfect. It won't always be as efficient as a machine. We have to take into consideration things like personality factors, I'm sorry, and how people are affected by pressure and how they react to challenges around pressure. So, for the manufacturing case, for example, what we did to take that into consideration was we looked at managers, warehouse managers who got confused under pressure, compared to people who kept their cool under pressure, and they had a different rate of nudging, or they had a different kind of nudge compared to the people who were cooler under pressure. Essentially, the system adapted to take into consideration how those warehouse managers behave on the ground, and work to make the data more efficient for them in terms of how they process and how they make decisions around that. So that's my presentation for today. Really had an exciting time sharing with everyone about how behavioral science and machine learning can actually be utilized to improve the workforces that we have today. Essentially, what the implications of this is very exciting. So, for the longest time, you have HR as a function treated as purely administrative. The HR admin collects data, does the recruitment, collects information, but they're not actually there, well, for the longest time to define business strategies. But when you have tools like this, where you're able to use behavioral data and combine it with machine learning to improve how companies can make decisions around their people, it changes the game for HR. It moves HR from an administrative cost center to a value center where companies can are best defined by the quality of talent that they bring to the table. So if there's something that you will leave with this presentation today, let it be that the workplace is changing just as the world is changing, and things are moving at a very quick rate. But let's not forget about the value of our people. Let's not forget or get lost in the automation process, where we embrace technologies without considering how people work around these technologies. Because at the end of the day, the companies that sustain and continue to move forward are the companies who care for and the companies who understand what makes their people excellent. And I hope that as we move forward in this new age of post coronavirus workforce, we can look at a system where we put people first and we integrate both technologies and advancements around our people. So thank you everyone for having me here today, and I hope that you learned something from the session. Have a great have a great day, everyone.
We all have our own biases of how things work. We all have our own biases of how things work. Like, how would I design things? Like, why would I design things in a certain way? Because in my head, I'm the one who's gonna use it. But in reality, right, what about everybody else? How are they gonna use the product? We all have our own biases of how things work. Like how would I design things? Like why would I design things in a certain way? Because in my head, I'm the one who's gonna use it. But in reality, right, what about everybody else? How are they gonna use this product?
In your team, you need to create that safe space that they can say whatever they want to say within the context of work pa rin, syempre. Like, if there's a certain process that needs to be cut, or if they think that we're having too many meetings in a week, sige, let's consider removing stuff.
Most of us are using mobile devices. Most of us are spending time online. So cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.